Hello, and welcome to the Coaches Corner, brought to you by the Endurance Lab, where the coaches from the lab recap the week and answer a couple questions from the forum. My name is Jason Flores, one of the Endurance Lab coaches, and I'm joined today by Taya Friesed and Ian Murray here in the Coaches Corner. Good morning, everybody. How's it going?
Good morning.
Hello.
Morning. We are in a rest week, trying to get everybody ready for the Power Lab. So we've got some exciting talks today. We're going to give you a couple topics here to think about over the rest week here and what to think about as we go forward into the Power Lab. And also for those who haven't signed up yet, you're going to get a little bit more information about what exactly the Power Lab is. I guess we could start a little bit about that, about when it starts. We'll do that on the front end here. So I'll hand it off to Taya. Give us a little bit about the logistics of when this starts and what we can look forward to, or athletes looking forward to. And if they can, straight here.
And it's if you did the performance lab and you thought that was a great lab, the Power Lab is going to be even better. We have workouts designed to prepare you to participate in the various events that you might be signing up for, be it races, be it fondos, be it long endurance rides. So the emphasis is really going to be on intensity at threshold and VO2, building those systems, continuing to build those systems. But we don't lose sight of the aerobic endurance that's so important as well for your training. So what you will see is a mix of workouts that will include those two aspects of training, intensity and volume. So we'll combine multiple abilities into single sessions, for example. So it's going to be pretty exciting. You won't get bored on a trainer, we promise. So we'll be able to prepare for all the demands of these events, including terrain changes, windy conditions, surges, accelerations, and much more. And not only for those of you who are going outdoors, but also those of you who are training exclusively indoors at this time.
Absolutely. I got a chance to preview the first week here just this week, and the workouts are definitely a twist to them. They've got the layers that you're used to seeing here from us at the Endurance Lab, and I think everyone who is going to be continuing with us will be pleasantly surprised. A good mix of the things that you've seen before, like Taya said, but some really fresh looks at getting some of that new work done. And then from the multi-sport side, Ian, what can riders expect on that end?
Oh, yeah. So we definitely have some good stuff coming with the multi-sport side of the house. We, at the request of a number of our lab participants, we're focusing this one on the Olympic and 70.3 type distance training. So it's going to be, it's a doozy. I'm not going to lie. It's going to have some hard workouts in there. We've got some definitely really good speed workouts that are designed for that longer distance running. And we've got some swim workouts that are going to, they're going to make you hate the pool. That's all I can say is they're going to make you hate the pool, but they're really good and they make you really strong. And when you get to do your events, you'll come out of the water fresh.
Excellent. Super exciting. All right. So usually we do this part called, this week in the lab, and so there isn't really anything scheduled in the lab, but I know Ian always wants us to remind, and Taya's got some great videos of what kind of things should riders focus on during this week as far as strength and flexibility and mobility, guys.
Yeah, the key is as you do these weeks off or light weeks, whatever you want to call it, everything has to be focused on teaching your body to recover well, recover fast, and maintain what you need it to do as you get out of this. The biggest thing I've seen is people throw away the strength workouts first during regular weeks, and then definitely during recovery weeks, because they look at it and go, well, I don't really need to do that. I'm in a recovery week. That core work is fundamental, being able to recover and to be able to apply yourself right when you get back into it without having a drop off. So you got to really focus on that core, even if it's 10 to 15 minutes a day.
And also, it is a rest week. Don't worry, you're not going to lose fitness if you don't go and do hard workouts on your bike. Take it easy. Take this as an opportunity to do those social rides that you always wanted to do. And just not having structure for a week. And it's okay to go out and do a workout, but don't take this as, oh, I really need to work hard, otherwise I'm going to lose fitness, because you won't.
Right.
Absolutely. Really good point. I think, rest on the side of the physical side and mental side is one thing that I always bring up, making sure that you come back rested. A lot of times people are fired up. Hopefully, if our lab has worked well and laid out well, you're ready for this time and you're ready to just be without the bike, be without the run, be without the pool just for a little bit here. And then hopefully that fires you up. You'll get that itchy feeling halfway through the week coming through, and you're just starting to get ready to get fired. Let's switch on over to hot topics in the lab. I'm actually going to start it off here. And one thing that I feel is super important as far as information here for a rest week is sleep. So I'm going to do a quick little jaunt about some tips on how does sleep affect your performance. And we've chatted a little bit about this, but wanted to bring it back during this week just to make sure that we kind of run the points home on why it is super important to sleep. So obviously sleep plays a role in performance, and our best performances typically follow a good night's sleep. But even in some of those cases, we'd like to forget that some of them are also preceded by bad sleep. So sometimes it can be a predictor of performance, but other times not. So essentially what we'll look at in this article, and I will post the article in our chat today after the Coach's Corner. It is actually from the Data Driven Athlete, really great blog. So if you want to check that out, some really great information, not about sleep, only about sleep, but all about endurance training too. So great partner that we have. We also can look into what sleep means for performance in both short and the long term. So we start off with talking about kind of what's normal. And in healthy adults, average sleep is about 7 hours a night. So really important to kind of keep that in mind. And National Sleep Foundation typically recommends healthy adults somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. So right about there. Essentially, there is limited research for sleep in athletes versus sedentary populations. So we're going to try to extrapolate a little bit of information there. And then this is the time to kind of think about how much sleep, average sleep, do you get, and kind of how you kind of gauge that through the days, and how do you put that against how you do in your workouts. So think about that as we chat here. So over time, let's just talk about, let's say you're routinely sleeping between 7 and 9 hours. And at this rate, whether you're an athlete or not, research are showing that you can be, if you are less than that, in some rather dangerous territory. We're talking about cognitive capability, glucose metabolism, appetite regulation, and things like immune function. So prolonged periods of shorter sleep or disturbances can really induce this chronic state of mental fatigue, which definitely can negatively affect your performance. So what do we want when we talk about what's out of the ordinary, or how we are out of the ordinary? You take an athlete who's lucky to sleep somewhere between, the higher level of that, between 9 or 11 hours a night. You occasionally deal with situations with interruption of your normal routine, like when you make trips or that sort of thing. So we kind of need to think about that. And, along with things like pre-race nervousness, anxiety, interrupted sleep patterns, unfamiliar sleeping arrangements. These are things as athletes, we need to make sure that we keep this in mind. So there's really no conclusive evidence that essentially dooms you on race day if you have a bad night of sleep. But there's just a large evidence really saying that you'll actually be fine if you're still getting, amount of rest. But it's still recommended, that 7 to 9 hours. So then the question becomes, go ahead, Ian.
No, Jason, I'd say actually off of that though, I actually would tell you that the sleep the night before the race, and I don't take this as license to go out and stay up late and party, but the sleep the night before the race is generally going to be less important than the sleep 2 nights before the race and 3 nights before the race, because your brain's not going to probably shut up, especially if it's your first race of this kind, your first iron distance race, your first, double century, your first Fonda, whatever. Your brain's not going to shut up. You're going to have a hard time sleeping. You're going to be excited. You're probably going to wake up 12 times to pee, all that. So if your race is on a Sunday, it's really important that your Friday night and Thursday night sleeps are amazing.
Yeah, I think it's super important, especially with travel. A lot of us do that to those races. I think it's important to know a lot of times you're going to have restless sleep, whether you're just thinking about what's happened in the next morning. So I guess the question becomes, how do we get better sleep? How do we quote unquote train ourselves to get better sleep? Essentially, sleep training doesn't typically happen in one night. It takes time, commitment, the same way it is for any of our skills that we learn in our endurance lab. It's things that you have to train. So there's a couple tips that you can follow. A lot of us are really kind of nerds about this, but we're going to kind of bring some of these things in and we can kind of share what we each do. But following these tips could essentially improve your sleep quality over time. So essentially you want to develop and follow a bedtime, a regular bedtime, awake and routine that can help utilize your body's natural promotion of sleep essentially. And during, and also you have an opportunity to possibly choose a daytime nap. For those that are parents, this doesn't happen. So you'll need to find the nighttime unless you can nap off at lunch or something like that. The last or some of the important parts can come from evaluating the room you sleep in, removing devices that can provide light, any cognitive activity or any arousal during that time. If you are trying to get sleep in the event, can definitely cause sleep disturbance. Things like cell phone, TVs, alarm clocks, and things like other electronics. And then also stress techniques as you lead up to sleeping time, using things like meditation or stretching, so anything to switch your mind off. For myself, I do a little bit of light stretching, just kind of wind down, put the phone down. I don't try to do like social media, Instagram posting, a lot of that. I find myself kind of running my mind with a lot of things going on kind of in our world. Personally, making a move and trying to get everything over to a new house, for example, it's been really tough to kind of just get wound down, writing emails and things like that. Right before sleep does not work. So it could definitely be a worthy trade for athletes to sleep in a more frequent, in the same place, and essentially to exchange for greater consistency and the quality of sleep. So kind of keeping that always the same. But in any case, putting work to optimize your sleep routine as one of the foundation is definitely great for your recovery strategy. So I know we've got a couple stories that we can reshare. I know Taya's got some great ones as far as how she makes sure that she is in the right environment of sleep. And it's always a great story. So Taya, if you could share that, that's great.
Yeah, I have to wait for my husband to fall asleep first, which it doesn't take long, fortunately, because he has like this on-off button that he just switches off at 8:30. And so after that happens, I go around the room and I block every single light in the room because he has charges everywhere. He's a techie junkie, and there's charges everywhere, devices everywhere, and we get the kids' devices into the room because we don't want the kids waking up in the middle of the night to play iPad. So it's all in the room, and I just go around and I throw clothes at everything to get the room dark. But the other thing I do, you talked about stretches, and that reminded me. Sometimes I don't have, let's say, I don't feel like doing a lot of stretches before, but there's two things that I do that I think help. One is I just lay down on the floor with my legs up the wall. And then I do the hip stretch, which is, you just, and this is in the video, in the Stretch for Cyclists video that we have on the lab. So you just stretch your hips. It is like a supine pigeon. You just fold, get one knee bended and do one hip at a time, because the hips, believe it or not, and if you do yoga, you know this, a lot of our emotions are carried on the hips, on those muscles. So it's not, people talk a lot about shoulders and having tense shoulders and neck with all the stress of daily life. A lot of it is on the hips. So loosen that up before going to bed, and then just leave your legs up the wall for a couple minutes and relax, a couple deep breaths.
I like that. Something reminded me. Oh, yeah. So we're opposite here at this house. I try to go to sleep before my wife. I do wake up before, obviously. It's 0400 here as we start the recording. But I try to go to sleep before. And so there's times where like, oh, I think she'll come up and be like, oh, I think I'm gonna go to sleep now. I'm like, you sure you don't want to watch like 30 minutes more TV so I can go to sleep first? You're like, oh, I know that royal wedding thing is on. Maybe you could watch that for a couple minutes. So I run upstairs and try to go to sleep. Ian, you got any interesting stories about getting to sleep?
Yeah, I mean, we both go to bed at the same time because my wife can't sleep after I get up, because not because I'm just loud, but she's a light sleeper. And I do stomp around as well, and sing really loud show tunes in the morning.
Not that he's loud at all.
I'm kidding. No, actually, I'm a pretty much don't talk to me until I have my coffee, at least a sip of my coffee type guy. But no, we get it. We go up and go to bed, and I'm one of those people. I need to have a little bit of noise in the background, or the TV on a little bit. For the most part, my wife, as soon as she lays down, it's like unconscious. sometimes I'm debating whether it's complete horizontal or unconscious first, but right around there. I need a little bit of stimulation in my brain to just shut it off, but not enough that I'm actually engaged. It's kind of that fine line of distracting my brain a little bit. And I use my red lens glasses when I go to sleep, so they block all light except for the red light, which is simulating the sundowning for your body. And so that helps me quite a bit. But I set the sleep timer so it goes off about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour after we're lying down in bed. But it is a little challenging. I too have to cover up some of the lights for the wife, so that's my job. I get in trouble when I don't, and but it's something we got to do. And unfortunately, I for work I have to keep my phone next to me in case I get a middle of the night call. So what I do is I flip it over so I don't see anything, and I have it set that for certain numbers it will ring, or if I get multiple phone calls from the same number, it'll actually call. Otherwise it's in silent mode. And I found that helps quite a bit. But no, I mean, for us, we're pretty easy. We do a tea usually in the evening, some kind of like a chamomile or the bedtime tea, and then I have my cookie or some kind of little dessert with it, something small.
Is Andrew on?
And then I'm saying that because Andrew is not here to chastise me. And then, like I said, we grow up, and the normal teeth brushing. Sometimes I'll have my Aerolax boots up there, so I'll do while I wait for someone who may not be quite as fast as me to get ready for bed to do a little leg massage while I'm waiting, and that helps out quite a bit too. But and we're pretty religious about the time we head upstairs and start getting ready for bed, and that's Monday through or Sunday through Friday. Saturday night we let it slip a little bit. Sometimes we'll hang out with friends, have a drink or two or whatnot, watch a movie or two, and we'll let that be like our cheat night on our routine. But I also will say this, for some people who are trying to find ways to get to sleep, don't get accustomed to saying, oh, I'll take a melatonin or I'll take a sleep aid. And while alcohol, enough of it will put you to sleep, it's not going to be a good sleep. So try to limit what you're doing, what you're ingesting in your body. You don't want a ton of sugar. You don't want a ton of alcohol, sugar. You don't want to eat super heavy. It should be things that are going to kind of relax your body, not spin up your digestive system, and get your body doing crazy things. Because the last thing you want is the middle of the night having to wake up and deal with something that's in your system that didn't go very well.
Yeah, really good point. You're just not getting that deep sleep. So just a really quick point, being an optometrist, for those who don't know, that is my day job. And talking about red light or orange light or that kind of colored light, I do talk to my patients a lot about that during the exam and kind of turning that down. More and more, we're finding specifically our kids exposed to this all throughout the day, and shutting that off at the end of the day, getting our, let's say, iPhones into night mode, or our Android phones with an app called Twilight to get switched off, and that color starting to change on our phones is super, super important on that end. As far as artificial light and the colors being more blue during the day, it's important to get that switched off, and that's why Ian talks about those red filtering lenses. So super important there as well. So really the effect of light, essentially, think of it as the sun goes down, the colors change from what it looks like at 12 in the afternoon to what it looks like at sunset. And that color at sunset is actually a stimulation for your body for those things that Ian mentioned, like melatonin and GABA. Essentially, those are the two neurotransmitters that are responsible for putting the cues on to go to sleep. And those colors are the ones that allow your circadian rhythm to kind of turn down and get you to sleep. So let me wrap this up.
Go ahead. One last thing on there, Jason. And yeah, obviously you guys probably don't know this, but I'm a bit of a nerd at times. And so I have smart light bulbs. I have smart light bulbs in the house.
Nice.
And they're connected to Wi-Fi, so I can control them through my phone. I set up routines on them. And where we have our TV, where we have our dining room, and where we have in our bedroom, the lights, I have them set up to change colors based on the time of day. So at 5 a.m, my light comes on, not my wife's, just my light, and it's blue light to help wake me up. So I have no sound alarm whatsoever. If that light comes on, sometimes I wake up in the first 2 seconds, sometimes it's 10 minutes later, but my body just kind of naturally wakes itself up. And then at night, I have it set that it's a really soft colored orangish light hue. Call it sunset mode. And it does that automatically. So again, that kind of helps tell my body to get down there. So that's the other thing is the lighting you put in your bedroom is important.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to get ready in the dark, which I'm okay with. You need to make sure your bedroom lighting is either adaptable or set to be focused on your nighttime
That's a good question.
routine.
That's a good point. I was going to ask, is it also like in the living room stuff, or is it just like when you do your final wind down, like in the bedroom?
No, so it's in our TV room and dining room where we spend most of the time here and in the bedroom.
Oh, wow.
So it goes down after about 8 o'clock. The lights start to dim a little bit.
Isn't that great? You could have, imagine you have company over and then the lights start
Turn orange.
Like, okay,
they
time
actually
to go,
off
people.
too. They have
so
a program
fun.
to go off at a certain time, and so they have gone off when we've had a party, and I've had to
You
yell.
gotta go home.
Yeah, well, I've had to yell at our virtual assistant here to turn them back on.
That's so funny. And then I guess my question goes, I'm trying to count my lights. I've got like 11 or 12 like canister lights in between my kitchen, my living room, and the area that we space in. And then I want to, knowing Taya's husband, like how many lights you possibly have like in that living area with all the kids and everything. I can only imagine it being like 15 or 20.
Oh, I don't know. It's actually not that much, believe it or not.
Is it?
No.
Okay. And do you guys have the lights as well? Do you guys do that?
No.
No.
The colors? The colors?
Yeah,
No.
no. Yeah, oh man, that's something I'd love to add. All right, so let me go ahead and wrap this up. So where the rubber meets the road, essentially, in the long term, prolonged sleep restriction, the quality of your training over time is essentially going to suffer. So we got to be careful of that. You're essentially at risk for infection, possible overtraining, just mental burnout, that sort of thing. So long-term consistency here is in training is vital for reaching optimal performance in a target event. And if you're going to train consistency with quality prioritizing sleep is a must. And then on the short term, don't stress the bad night of sleep. We all have those nights, so don't stress about that. And it's also possible that even with a night or two of bad sleep, performance may not negatively be effective. So definitely important. So keep those ideas kind of running through your head as you get through the rest week. And anytime we take time off, because we are doing 2 weeks on, 1 week off, always bring this back. Rewind this and listen to that. Definitely a good place to go. All right, I'm actually going to jump over to Ian. I know he's got a couple new things as far as topics in the lab, so we'll get started with him.
All right, thanks, Jason. Yeah, we had a couple quick questions that came up, and I want to go through them real quick. One is people getting a new position on their bike, and this is more for triathletes more often than not because we're getting used to aero bar positions. But it also does fit to people on a road bike. If you go from a fairly relaxed position to a fairly aggressive position, more often than not, when you move to a new position on a TT bike or a tri bike in the aero bars, you are definitely going to feel less stable because your weight is much more over that front wheel. And the more aggressive of a position you get, actually the less stable you are because you're up over that front wheel. So that's not just a feeling. It's a fact. You are less stable. Now, that being said, you need to practice this new position, and not every position from a bike fitter is the best position for you. So what I want to encourage people to do is you definitely need to get a bike fit from a qualified bike fitter. But I'm going to qualify that with just because the person's a qualified bike fitter doesn't mean they're not a jerk, or doesn't mean they're the right bike fitter for you. You have to find that person who works for you, just like you have to find that doctor. It might be the most knowledgeable doctor in the world, but if they're a schmuck and you can't deal with them because their bedside manner is horrible, and they won't listen to you, then you need a new doctor. It's same with a bike fitter, a bike mechanic, anything that's a service provider. So when you do get your new position on that bike, you are going to feel uncomfortable if you had a decent position before. If you had a very comfortable, good, well dialed in position, but maybe wasn't as fast, you move to a much more aggressive position, you're not going to feel comfortable right away. You do have to practice this. So I always recommend get on the trainer first. Do not just take it out in the middle of the road, out in the road, especially on a hard, windy day or really difficult traffic conditions. Put on the trainer. Practice get in that position. Practice get out of the position. Get yourself comfortable just being in that tighter, more aggressive position that is going to be a little more difficult on your core muscle group as well. Then when you feel a little more comfortable in it and you can spend 15, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes in the aero bars on the trainer, go outside and just get a ride. Practice getting in and out of the aero bars to the hoods or the horns, depending on how you have your setup. And then get some time out on the road where you get real good quality time in the aero bar on roads that are not heavily trafficked. Now, I will say this, for us riders who are not quite as gravitationally challenged, some people like to call it smaller, but we have a problem with gusty winds. Gusty winds throw us around quite a bit. Now, it's not going to throw you off your bike. It may throw you off the road, but it's not going to throw you off the bike. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're riding in these conditions, that if you're not in a position in which you're very comfortable managing your bike or maneuvering the bike, you give yourself a little extra space. So if you're riding on the correct side of the road, like we do over here in the US and most of the world, if you're riding and the wind is coming left to right, give yourself a little grace to the right side, because as traffic passes you, whether it's going the opposite direction or the same direction, it's going to block that wind briefly. And if you're leaning into it and you sit up as that traffic goes, as soon as that traffic is past you, that wind's going to hit you again. And it could toss you off the side of the road. So you don't want to be riding on that line. Likewise, you don't want to be leaned too hard, because then you'll veer into traffic once you lose that wind on your shoulder. If it's coming from right to left, again, same thing. You're not going to get a block from it, but you definitely need to be cognizant of the fact that as the winds gust, you're going to be weaving back and forth a little bit. So you, again, don't want to be right on that white line, because if the wind lets up, you'll go into the shoulder or into the guardrail or off into the ditch. Or you don't want to be too far over, because if it's going to gust up and push you over, you don't want to veer into the opposite lane. So be real cognizant of what the wind is doing, and make sure you're comfortable managing the bike in that position. And if you're not, go back to the trainer, get some more time in it, maybe try and get on some rollers and have someone help you with that, or just practice riding in around an area where you know is safe. But it is imperative that you get on and get used to the bike and used to the position before you take it out on the road for long unsupported rides.
One other thing I wanted to mention here, it's not related to bike fit, but it's more related to being stable on your bike. A trick that is very helpful is when you're going into a long descent and it's windy and you are a smaller rider, and depending on the type of bike that you have to. But anyway, when you're going down, the key is to keep pedaling. So not only you are in a more aero position, but you also keep pedaling, because that action of keep pedaling will prevent you from being tossed around as much. So even if you don't have any power, you can be in a super easy gear, and you can even be pedaling backwards, really, if you're going 40 miles per hour, you don't want to go faster, but that will help.
The problem I have with that, though, Taya, is when I'm descending down a big hill like that, it's very hard to pedal when I'm sitting on my top tube with my chest on my bars.
Yeah. So yeah, just remembering those tips to make sure that you're keeping your balance, essentially, and that's what the pedaling does. So, but as Ian does, I have seen Ian do this trick. I do have it on video, and you can see him go from 500 meters doing nothing and just gain on you and pass you, even though he's like tiny. I've seen him do this in real life, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't recommend doing it at home. I really don't. I'm probably stupid for doing it, but when you are light like I am, you can't give up too much time on the downhill.
No.
All right. One other thing we had brought up in the lab was side stitches. And we've talked cramps a number of times in this podcast, but I really think side stitches are just different. Side stitches are not those cramps that you get in your leg muscles from pedaling or muscular endurance failures. Often I see side stitches are either breathing related or you went out too hard. And more often than not, this happens during running. I don't recall ever getting a side stitch or a belly cramp on my bike. You, Jason, have you ever had that?
No, not on the bike. Yeah, just some weird. No, I would say no. The best answer would be no.
It's like I've had ear cramps, but never belly cramps. Yeah. No, so I mean, this is one of those things that if you've been out of practice with your running and you're not as well trained in your run as maybe you would like to be, or maybe as you were 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but you're still running as if you are fit like you were before, that's going to cause a problem, because you are going to experience this. So what I always try to tell people, if you're having that side stitch in, you have to do one of two things. One, you can suck it up and just deal with the pain and push through it. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that becomes crippling. So you have to know what your limits are, and you can test them, but understand there's a price to be paid for that. But the other part is just back it off briefly and focus on the breathing. If you just back off, breathe briefly, and then really focus the breathe in, breathe out, and get that good rhythm going, you'll probably be able to pick it up again if you catch it early enough. If you don't, you're just going to have to ease off a little bit. And remember for next time, don't charge too much on the paying credit card at the beginning, because that interest rate is horrible. So, that's unfortunately, that's all I can tell people with side stitches. And I've done this before where I've gone out way too hard, way too early. And it just crushes you. And it's usually one of those shorter, intense races, 5K, 1 mile, something like that. You don't tend to get too many stomach cramps in a marathon. That's usually your actual legs cramping up on you, or your shoulders. So I'll go into more detail in the forum on this for the athletes who are asking about it. But yeah, unfortunately, all I got to tell you is we got to get back to the road and get some miles in those legs and really work on some speed work to help figure out what pacing is going to work for you.
Exactly.
And the last thing I want to cover is I'm going to cover this briefly, and only because we talked about it with sleep, and we talked about it in a couple other times when we're talking preparing for racing. If you didn't get to watch the Giro d'Italia last week, you really, really need to look at it. So during week 2 or the end of week 1, Esteban Chavez and Simon Yates were crushing the field, absolutely destroying everybody, just taking dreams, smashing them into little bits, putting them into their espresso maker and drinking it. It's just awesome. And then they had a rest day. And a day after the rest day, not a really particularly hard stage, but there's a climb right away, literally after the neutral, up the mountain they went. And Esteban Chavez is known as a climber. He's a little bitty Colombian guy. And for some reason, and he can't even explain it, he just had no gas. He had no power. And he got dropped and lost 4 minutes on that climb. And then the peloton realized it and just crushed him. And they just absolutely destroyed that little man and made him cry. And
they tried everything and his team tried everything to bring him back. And every time he got like within a minute, everyone just like stretched it out. Like they was just shooting for him the whole time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was definitely aimed at keeping it, at knocking him out of the race. And they did that. And one bad day, his Giro hopes gone. I mean, I'm not talking they were just, dashed, gone. And so the reason I say that is when you're looking at your own racing schedule, be very careful about taking that rest day the day before a race, because man, your body just sometimes doesn't react. And it's much better to take it 2-3 days beforehand and get a little bit of work in, a little bit leg opening right before your race, the day before your race, because you don't want to go in there unsure what your body's going to do. Because if you even have any doubts, there's a chance you're going to get destroyed. Now, it doesn't happen that way for everybody, and it doesn't happen that way every time, but I've just seen it happen more times than you would like to see. So that's just my take on it, and I think we just saw another good example of that. I mean, and it was absolutely brutal. Fabio Aru had a similar problem, and during the time trial, we saw some guys have the similar problem too the day after a rest day. So, yeah, just be very careful with that.
And I think athletes can get an idea whether they are, how they would feel after a rest day, even during training. If you have a hard session after a complete rest day, that might give you some hints on how you might feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Definitely some really good topics there. We can definitely revisit some of those in the forum as we've got some more information. So let me take a quick break here to just remind everybody that this podcast is brought to you by the coaches of the Endurance Lab, where you can train smart, learn more, and get results. And that our labs are specifically designed to help you achieve your structured training goals with a group of cyclists and triathletes working towards similar goals. And in the lab, you'll have direct access to us, the certified coaches and experts in various aspects of endurance training. You'll also learn from your own peers going through the same lab, as you'll have access to the exclusive forum that we're talking about. We use online trainings and cycling platforms that include Training Peaks, Zwift, Trainer Road to help facilitate this group interaction. So head over to endurancelab.fit right now to find out when the next lab begins, and it actually begins on Monday, so definitely get in there really quick. All right, and now for a topic that a lot of riders have been looking forward to, essentially riding in heat and humidity and how to handle that, as the weather here, at least in North America, is starting to warm up a little bit. So we can talk a little bit about that.
And I'll start by saying that humidity is something that a lot of people look at and talk about and say, wow, it's such a humid day. Oh, look at the humidity index. for this day, it's going to be muggy, it's going to be sticky. But really, what makes the air feel thick is moisture in the air. And the measurement for that is dew point. So when you're looking at the forecast and you want to find out whether that day is going to be a hard one in terms of humidity, along with the heat, is really dew point that you want to look at. It's the amount of moisture in the air, and it can be misleading. For example, if you have a temperature of 30 and a dew point of 30, that will give you a relative humidity of 100%.
Yeah.
But if you have a temperature of 80 and a dew point of 60, you have relative humidity of 50%, and you will feel much more humid in the 80-degree day, because with the 50% relative humidity, than the 30-degree day with 100%.
Interesting.
Because what causes this is the dew point. So if you want a real judge of how dry or humid you feel outside, look at it this way. If the dew point is equal or less than 55, it's going to be a dry, more comfortable day, even if the temperature is higher. If it's between 55 and 65 for dew point, it will start to become sticky and muggy. If it's greater than or equal to 65, there's a lot of moisture in the air and it's starting to become oppressive. That's going to be a tough day for you. So look at it that way. I think that's keeping that in the background. Heat is performance's biggest enemy. Why is that? It's well documented that athletes have a drop in power output in hot conditions. You have more blood going to the skin to keep you cool, and therefore now your muscles are fighting for oxygen and your skin is fighting for oxygen from the blood, so your heart is working harder. So 75% of the energy you expend to move your bike is lost as heat, and only about 25% is actually from work that you produce with your muscles. So you can lose up to 1.5 liters of fluid per hour in very hot conditions.
Wow.
As you acclimate to exercising in the heat, your plasma volume will increase, you start sweating sooner, you sweat more profusely, and with that, you get more acclimated. And we can talk about acclimation a little bit later on too, but if you want to try to acclimate, typically it takes 14 days for that to happen. So 1 week is not enough. Okay, so body water, right, is the most effective means of dissipating heat from your body. So when you think about what can I do when I go outside on a hot, humid / dew point, right, day, high dew point, what can I do? Your hydration is your number one thing. Don't let the plasma volume drop in your body, in your blood. So that means you need to be hydrating. Now, water alone is not going to provide hydration for you. What happens is your small intestines are where 95% of nutrient and water is absorbed. So physiologically, there are specific things that the body needs to create enough water to net water gradient in the small intestines so that the water can be absorbed. That's why the drinks for sports performance contain glucose and sodium, and to a lesser extent, potassium, magnesium, chloride, and calcium. So plain water is not going to be absorbed by your small intestines. Mm-hmm. Now, how much should you be drinking? I was reading an article from Dr. Stacy Sims, and she mentions that peer-reviewed science literature agrees that about 8 to 12 milliliters per kilogram per hour. So 8 to 12 milliliters per kilogram per hour of a physiological fluid, meaning water with glucose, sodium, and those other electrolytes, will help maintain blood volume. Any comments so far before I move on to salt tablets?
Yeah, so definitely this really speaks to what you're going to try to hydrate yourself with. So a lot of times with the group with Stacy Sims and Alan Lim, these are the people that are responsible for Osmo and Scratch Labs. The percentage of glucose or carbohydrate in their hydration drinks where they are separating their hydration from their feeding is super important. It's a lot less than the Gatorades, the Powerades, the really high carbohydrate side of things that are also being used for fueling, where they're about 6 to 8%, where they're dropped down towards 4 or 5% to get this balance between glucose to be able to get enough sodium and water in. And so that's the key. So there's transporters for both glucose to get water in, as well as a sodium gradient in your small intestine that helps water get in as well. And it's using these two transport systems to maximize that amount that's getting into the body. So super key. If we are separating it and you're not fueling and you're able to do it, this is how you're going to get the best hydration with the glucose and the sodium and into your bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the other key points too that you've hit on is the evaporation of the water is what cools you off. So when one of the reasons the wicking material works well is because it takes the sweat off your skin and evaporates it out, which allows you to sweat more, and it has a cooling effect on it. When you're in the very hot, humid, high dew point times, like when I run out here, I will sweat like a crazy person, but it doesn't actually cool me off as much because it's not evaporating. And so a lot of times that's when I'll try to actually flick off as much of the sweat as I can sometimes to let my body sweat more, because if it's got an ample amount of sweat liquid all over it, it's not really helping itself. The body doesn't really know how to deal with that as well. That's why I dump the cold water. That's why you'll see a lot of athletes putting ice down their shirts, down their shorts, things to help cool the skin quickly, because that evaporative effect is not taking place because of that high humidity or the moisture content in the air. That's very important.
Just don't throw ice water in your head. If you want to do cool water in your head, it's okay, but not ice, because I think what happens is there's a lot of blood vessels in your head, and that can cause the opposite effect. And the other point then for the evaporation that reminded me of indoors versus outdoors. So this is also why sometimes people are at the same temperature indoors and out, but they feel better outdoors, because you have that wind. If you're on a bike, for example, you have that wind and it gets evaporated, your sweat gets evaporated so much faster.
Yeah. And the other part of that too is your ability of your skin to deal with the sweat and the evaporation depends on how sunburned you are. Once you're sunburned, your body is not capable of cooling itself as much. So that's very important to put on your sunscreen or wear the sun protective clothing, because later in a race, the longer races, once you get that skin cooking, now your actual job is keeping that skin cool and moist to keep it from being damaged, and it's no longer focused on preventing the overheating as much.
Interesting.
Yeah, quick question for you, Ian. I know if you are a fan of Ian's channels, you often find Ian running with I guess less tech clothing than you would normally see. Do you find using some of kind of the science running tight shirts to do that wicking versus just kind of the natural body doing that while you're running? Do you feel one is more advantageous, or is it a heat thing? Is it what are the reasons for you using that tech?
I mean, mostly it's because of just the dead sexiness why I do the way I do. No, actually, so I will say this. I will say that on shorter runs, a lot of times I will wear a tech shirt to help some of the wicking and control the heat. But unless I'm wearing one of my race fitting tops, I found that when I'm doing my longer runs, it becomes the chafing is more of the issue.
Gotcha.
And so I outweigh the chafing side of it vice the wicking side of it. And I'm just, usually when I'm doing that means I have someone with me, so I'm dumping water constantly on myself to keep my body cool. But I will say this, the high-tech shirts actually cool your body better than running without a shirt on.
Okay.
And they'll protect you better from the sun. But at a certain point, when it's so wet, it starts to chafe. Then you have those issues that you often see some runners with looks like they're vampires.
It can be bad. I think it's I guess last point here, it is important that when you for both cycling and for running, that you get well fitted clothing. A lot of times people are trying to get a certain look or whatever it may be, and it's a little bit looser, it can work against you. It's specifically a lot in running, as Ian's describing, but also in cycling, whether it be aerodynamically, chafing, all of those things. You need to get a properly fit kit. It doesn't need to be suck your gut in, can't move, but it does need to be form fitting because it needs to touch your body in order for it to work. So just that last point.
Okay, so we were talking about then going back to how much you should be drinking. One other word here about the drink, what you have in your bottle. Do not drink icy cold drinks. In other words, just having, it can be cool, right? But not icy cold. So let's say a slushy full of crushed ice in there. Because the problem with that is the ice will trick your body. You know, you'll get that ice in your stomach, that icy water in your stomach, and it will trick your body into slowing or diminishing the cooling mechanisms, because it tricks it into thinking that, oh, it's not so hot anymore. And so now you have less blood flow to the skin and you produce less sweat. So cold, okay, icy, not okay.
And if you do have icy, the technique I use with it is I put it in my mouth and I hold it there for a few seconds to kind of normalize the temperature a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'll let it kind of dribble out my mouth and onto my body just to help add a little cool water on the body, but it normalizes it. So by the time I do swallow it and it goes down to the stomach, it's no longer ice cold water, it's cool water.
Yeah, I like that.
So one last thing here on the hydration for hot conditions is salt tablets. Salt tablets, I think there's two theories. There are those in the science world that would tell you that you don't need salt tablets, and others would say yes, you need them, or others would say it depends. Salt tablets, nevertheless, be careful with them. Just because somebody's taking salt tablets, don't think that it's a good idea for you as well, even if you're a salty sweater. A lot of us have enough sodium stores in our bodies, and we consume plenty of sodium through the foods that we eat. And so the salt tablets could generate more stress into your gut than you might realize. So it is necessary to have salt, common salt, chloride ion, and sodium chloride for cellular function. And it is lost through sweat, but the loss rate of sodium is not as high enough to warrant a high load replacement during exercise for most people. There are, I think, ways of doing tests for how much sodium you might need. Just like you can have your nutrition tailored for you, you can have your hydration tailored for you by doing a couple of lab tests and customizing that hydration for yourself. But if you're not going through that, if you're not going to pay for all of those things and have it customized, I would say be very careful with salt tablets.
Yeah, I think one way to at least get an idea, and what Teo was kind of alluding to, there's a group called Precision Hydration, and there's actually two ways to do it. You could do their online version, which will give you an idea of how much you should be getting in, and you could do some backwards math to kind of make sure you're getting that amount before a workout and after workout. And it's worked great for me and a lot of my athletes to kind of get a ballpark. A lot of times it's us lessening the amount that they're getting in because people are putting a lot in. And then, of course, the step above that is to get their actually hydration test done. And I don't think any of the coaches have done that actual hydration test, but definitely keeping an eye on this to make sure that it's not causing issues and essentially working with what works best for you.
Yeah, I've done I do mostly scratch labs, and when I do my longer races, it's every other fill. I'll put a scratch labs packet in, but yeah, I don't take any additional salt tablets for the most part. I have, when I did Ironman Texas in 2015, I was cramping up pretty bad, and I did grab a product called Base, and that helped quite a bit. But honestly, I found unless I'm in a really extreme cramping condition and have sweated out a ton of salt, I don't really find the salt being anything other than a GI issue inducer for the most part. So,
Yeah.
but that's just me. I know other people may feel they need it, or they may like doing it, but I agree with Tay on that one. I'm not a huge fan of the salt tabs unless I'm in like major distress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens very quickly in the gut is you end up with a bit of a reverse water flux. So the water goes to sodium. So if you have a high concentration of sodium in your digestive tract, the water will leach into the GI tract rather than be absorbed into the blood. So now you have a condition where you have this gut slushing and dehydration, and you can get, diarrhea from it.
Yeah.
You're much better off. You're much better off preloading before the race with some chips and salsa the day or two before.
Oh yeah,
and you'd be good.
Yeah, I think so. And I think just barely touching on kind of the cramping thing, a lot of people think it's that electrolyte or that salt balance. But one thing to think about, if in fact it was a salt balance that was causing that cramp, let's say in your calf, then your whole body would actually be cramping, because your whole body there wouldn't be a salt enough in the whole body. So your whole body would just cramp up. So just remember, when it's exercise induced and it's local cramps, it's most likely not a systemic issue that we're talking about here. As far as salt, it's typically a neurological thing. But we've had some talks about that, but just to kind of touch on that. So did we have anything else there?
Cooling, right?
Yeah. Ted was, we had a little bit about pre-cooling before an event there.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So before an event, there are a couple of things that you can try to do, which is external cooling. So instead of ingesting, like we talked about the liquids and staying hydrated, you can, some of them unfortunately are not very practical. For example, being in a cold pool before your event, and then you jump out and then you go do your event.
I carry a cold pool with me everywhere I go, so I don't.
You can get one of those, kids' pools.
Yeah.
A cold jersey. You can, I think I've heard of ice socks to keep your feet cool as well. So those are things that you can put on before your event, but try to keep your temperature. You do a warm up though, right? And then as you go, the key is starting the event with your body temperature a little bit cooler to take it longer to catch up to core temperature, to give you some advantage at the beginning of the event.
Yeah, they do have the ice vests, and I've seen cyclists warming up with them and runners warming up with them. If you remember at the Rio Olympics, the middle distance athletes and longer were hanging out wearing these ice vests prior to the start of their races, because they're running in the afternoon. It's 3 in the afternoon. It's 1,000 degrees with 1,000% humidity in full sun, and they're having to go really hard for a mile or 800 meters. So that core temperature goes up real quick. So that's what a lot of them what they did. I've never heard of ice socks. Personally, I don't need anything to keep my feet cold. I'm mostly quite the opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess it also depends on the length of your event. Obviously, if the length is longer, you want to make sure you put some of that in the bank. But for shorter races, obviously, there are different case studies there. But really super interesting. All right. So it looks like we've made it through the hot topics here of the week. We can transition to on the horizon. And what we've all been talking about here is getting through the rest week here and getting started on the Power Lab that's coming up. And essentially it does start on May 28th, like Taya said, and it is designed to prepare athletes to participate in all kinds of events with emphasis and intensity of threshold and VO2 max, but really still keeping some good sight on the aerobic endurance. So essentially it translates to workouts with multiple abilities, single sessions that, kind of look at a couple different things. So athletes are prepared for all the demands of these events. So essentially check it out, head over to EnduranceLab.fit. It's an 8-week training program. You could do it on Zwift, Training Peaks, they're all compatible. You could do it outdoors. There's also strength workouts, a lot of them built by Ian and Tia here, really great. We're going to be integrating a lot of the stretching that you should be thinking about, as well as kind of the maintenance things as you go throughout some 15-minute sessions that we've done. And you'll get access to the forum and also access to all of us here at the Coach's Corner. All right. Was there anything else that we need to bring up that we forgot as we head finishing up this rest week, everybody?
I think that covers it.
Yeah, thanks.
They better bring their work boots to the Power Lab, because it's no joke.
No, this first week has definitely been trying, and I think it's a really good part of the season as we work through the riders who have been through the lab. And don't be turned off if you haven't been with the lab or training with the lab. You can jump in. It is scalable, so it is important. Depending on your time, we can scale. It can be scaled to as many as 3 workouts a week to all the TSS that you need to get to your goals, and we can help you kind of guide you through that as you get signed up.
And you can reach out to any of us through the Endurance Lab. Go to the endurancelab.fit. Our contact information is there. So if you have any questions at all about joining a lab, just send us an email.
Yeah, definitely check there. And then from there, you could get connected to the forum. You don't need to be a lab participant for the forum. If you have questions about the team, about the lab, about anything, that's a good place to reach a lot of us. All right. So with that, we want to thank everybody for joining us today here in the Coach's Corner. If it's your first time listening, we'd love to hear, and you want to hear more content from the Endurance Lab, head over to your favorite podcast app and search the Endurance Lab, or head to YouTube and search and click the same. And don't forget to click subscribe. For more information on when the next lab is, obviously we all know when it is. It's on the 28th. Head over to endurancelab.fit and learn where you can join us to train smart, learn more, and get results. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.